So welcome back to lesson 2 of week 6. In the last lesson you learned about how to process and work with string variables. In this lesson you'll learn how to save string data to a file. So in this lesson we'll review what an external file is, how to save text to an external file, and how to read text from a file into a program. The reason we need to do this is because the RAM of a computer is electronic memory. All the work that you do when you run a program is stored in RAM. It's stored in electronic form. That means that if you close the program or switch off the computer, all of that data will be lost. The value of all your variables will be lost. Storage, on the other hand, is permanent memory. It uses non-electronic means to store the data. And by copying your data from electronic RAM into storage, you can keep it for next time. And quite often you want to do that. So first we'll look at how to write data to a file. I suggest that you set up the file name that you want to use, just choose any name, as a constant. Constants in Python are conventionally shown all in uppercase. They work exactly the same as variables, but we've just decided as a programmer that we're not going to change the data stored in the constant. And I set up my constants at the very top of my programs. Here I've decided on the name of the text file I will use in this program. I've called it high score because it's going to save the names of people that achieve high scores in a computer game, and I've saved it as the file name txt. That means I can use standard code throughout my program, and if I want to use that code another time in another program, I only have to change this one line, which will typically be in the top 2 or 3 lines of my program. And by making a change to that file name, all the rest of my code will work. And so I can reuse my code as many times as I like. Next, I need to get ready the text that I'm going to save to the text file. This might be many, many lines, but I've made a very simple program. I'm just asking the user to enter their username, and I'm saving it as a string variable called save text. And save text is going to consist of the username plus the new line character. That's so that every time I save a username to my text file, it will be saved on a fresh line. You don't have to do this, but you need to put something in between your different save values so they don't all just run together. And I've chosen to use a new line break. You could put a comma, for instance, or a space in between your text values. So here are the magic lines of code that will write my string variable saved text to a file with the name file name. And remember, that's a constant, that's whatever I've set it to be at the very top of my program. So you can simply copy these lines and they will work to save any string variable to a file. Couple of things I just want to draw your attention to. One is that letter A there. That means append, and it means the new names will be appended to the file. That means added to the end of the file. The file will get bigger and bigger each time as more people add their names to the file. If I changed it to a W, it would overwrite instead of append, and that means that the new data would overwrite any other data that was in the file. Sometimes that's what you want to do. For instance, if your file was saving a password, and if you change the password, you'd want to overwrite the old password. So that A could be a W. It changes the way that the code works. And here, in the brackets here, I've put the name of my string variable. And again, that could be any variable. Other than that, you can just copy this code every time in whatever program you're using, and it will write your data to a text file. Using code like this, which creates a file object called myFile, has the advantage that it neatly opens the file, writes the data to the file, and then closes it again. There are other ways of doing this where we have to write different lines for all of those processes, but I found this to be the easiest code to use. So here is literally the whole program. I've set up a file name, I've created a text variable, and I've written the string variable to the file. And you can copy this code exactly and it will work in any program. After you've run the program, check your Python folder, here's mine, and you'll see that as well as the Python program that you've written that's called file handling, a text file's been made and it's got the name that I gave it in my program, high score. And if I open that text file, you'll see I've added two usernames, Alison and Gorgatron. It doesn't matter what I've added. I've run the program twice and each time I added a different value. It's a plain text file. It doesn't have any formatting, and it's just stored the data that I've entered. It's kept it for another time. It's of limited use to simply write to a file. The other thing that we need to be able to do is to load or read the data from the text file into our Python program for next time. So let's have a look at how to do that. It's almost the same code. Here's the complete program that loads the data from a file called highscore.txt and then prints it out. It's very, very similar to the code we used last time. So let's compare the code that we used to save or write a text variable to a file and the code that we would use to read text from a file to a string variable. And in both these examples, I've called the variable text. So let's look at the two differences. If I want to save text to a file, I put the little letter A in quote marks after the file name, and that means I open it to append, to add to the file. Remember, I could also use W and that would overwrite. However, if I want to open the file to read from it, to get data from it, I use a little letter R. That tells the computer to open the file to read. And the other difference, you can probably see it. If I'm writing to the file, I use a method called write. Notice that the text variable is the parameter in brackets after the word write. So write this text variable. Obviously, I've used the word text. You just use whatever the name of your variable is as the parameter to the write method. Write, W-R-I-T-E. However, if I want to read from the file, I use the read method. The read method doesn't have a parameter, but it does have a returned value. And you have to do something with that returned value, save it to a variable. Here I've saved it to a variable called text. So these two very similar blocks of code do slightly different things. The top block writes a text string variable to a text file, and the lower block reads from the file and saves that data as a variable. So to recap, you should be clear about why we use files. It's so that we can save values to use again after the program has closed. You can simply copy the code that I've given you in order to write to a file or to read from a file. The only thing you have to change is the name of the variable that you want to read or write. So here's an exercise. Create a file of usernames, for instance, for a social media program like Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. Save all the usernames into a text file and then write a program which lets a user add their name to the file, but first it will check if that username is already in use. You're probably familiar with this. If you try and log on to Instagram or something, TikTok, and your name has already been used by somebody else, you've got to use a different version of your name, for instance, with numbers at the end or something like that. So write a program like that. You won't be able to create the blue boxes that you can see on the screen here, but it will ask for their username. You can, if you're feeling confident, you could do password as well and store their username with their password. Okay, so have a go at that. If you can make that work, you can be quite confident that you've learned how to use files. See you in the next lesson.